Hello, everybody, and welcome to Phoenix Unleashed. I'm Schiffer Hendry, your host, and these are very special times. So today, I want to start out by saying I'm a little frazzled. I just finished, maybe you might have been part of it, a very special event that was supposed to be 5 days and ended up being more super intense before, during, and after. So, and then I taught classes yesterday and today, so my brain is just um, not as quick as usual, but let's do our best. So, this is the month of Shvat. What I want to talk about today is purpose, destiny, and souls. So, I want to talk a little bit and then I want to tell you my own personal story. I'll hopefully do a shortened version of that. How I got taken into my destiny and purpose without any conscious awareness before it happened that it even existed. So it's a pretty amazing story, and people are telling it all over the world around this time. Why? Because tonight is the 10th of the month of Shvat, the Hebrew month of Shvat, known as Yud Shvat. And this is the date, this is the anniversary of the date that the Lubavitcher Rebbe took his place as Rebbe. There is a central soul, as I've said many times, for every generation. We are all part of that central soul. Adam was a central soul. Adam and Eve were central souls. Moses was a central soul. That included, those central souls are like the brain of the body human, and included within that brain is every cell of the body, which is every one of us, every person of the generation, and included in the very core of each and every person of the generation of that central soul, in our very core, including you and including me, is a spark of that central soul. So the relationship is literally symbiotic, just like in your brain. Your brain has a map and wiring that connects to every single cell. It's like the command and soul control center, and each cell is kind of like its own brain, and that's what allows everything to work together on behalf of the one mission of the body, which is to keep you moving and growing through life, to keep you well, and to help you ultimately, to help you live your purpose. So this date of the 10th of Shvat is very celebrated, especially around the world, especially in the Chabad movement. And in general, the days leading up to it have special significance to me. On the 7th of Shvat, which just passed, I got married. I also had my first child, my son. And I did not know till many years later that the 7th of Shvat was the anniversary also of the story that changed my life, literally from one day to the next, changed my life. So this is a day, because we're connected, before I tell the story, because we're connected, all of us, to the central soul. You don't have to know that you have a brain. I mean, theoretically, you probably do, but you don't actually have to know that you have a brain, or how the brain works, or that the brain is connected with the cells, or how that works. You don't have to know that in order for it to be true. And the Kabbalah, the Torah, tells us that because we are one, humanity is one, but we're not one just side by side. Like if you put two cells in a room, a foot cell and a nose cell, they're not really going to have an ability to connect and to thrive and to work together. So for all the cells, even if you put every cell of the body in a room together, without the brain, nothing would happen. They would not be able to unite and coordinate, because the brain is the command and control center. And every one of us, every cell is connected to that brain. Every cell contains that brain. It works just like that. And that is the focal point of our oneness. So every one of these central souls reveals, I should say, a particular level of Torah, of the blueprint for creation, divine wisdom, and will that corresponds to that generation. We are moving, we are growing collectively as an organism. We are developing, we are evolving. We are now going through a birth process. This is happening over time, and we're reaching the place of a state change where the birth is actually going to happen. So how does that all get guided? We see that there's a tremendous amount of conflict between people, at least, mentally, families splitting apart, friends not talking to each other. There's all kinds of craziness going on at this point, and there is confusion before a birth. There's no question about it. So what is the solution? The solution is to connect to that which makes us one. How do we do that? And that's the central soul. How do we do that? Two ways. We connect to the teachings of the central soul, which are designed, customized for our generation. Why? Because that's the brain communicating with the body, and the brains within the body. the individual brains, and to internalize that until it turns the lights on within our own being. So the Torah, the deep Torah of authentic Kabbalah and Hasidus, is not meant to be learned just from the outside in, like an exercise that informs you or tells you what to do, but is actually designed to be like a light that turns on, that lights up the room of your own inner self and your own inner light. And that's a process that's progressive. So as you learn particularly the teachings of the central soul, the Torah that's brought down and revealed by that central soul. So Moses revealed the entire 5 books of Moses, the Chumash, the Old Testament, the written Torah, as it's called, with all of the rules and keys to the code, so that he and his every successive generation could use those tools in a very authentic way. It has to be in alignment with the rules for this. You have to be trained in it. You have to know what you're doing. You have to follow the rules, or it's not real. It's a deviation, even a contradiction to what's real. Nevertheless, the Torah was never meant to be revealed all at once. It was given all at once, and it will never be given again, but it is meant to be revealed in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper ways through the central soul. And not only that, through the people of the generation learning the Torah, all of the Torah, but particularly the Torah of the central soul, which is our marching orders, our new transmissions, the new levels of revelation, processing it through your mind and heart, and then living it in your life, and even bringing your own unique, when you really understand something and it's true, like we don't make things up and call them Torah, but if we learn Torah deep enough, one point of Torah, one thing that hits you and you absorb it till it's really, really yours, you will have, I don't care what your background is, you have to do it correctly. You have to do it in accordance with the rules. But no matter who you are, if you do that, you will ultimately have a perception, your own internal revelation of some aspect of the Torah, some piece of it that nobody ever had before, because it's combining with you. It's running through the lens of your mind, your heart, your lineage, everything about you. And in this way, you're revealing new levels of Torah. And what happens when that happens? Torah is the blueprint for creation. It says that God looked into the Torah and created the world, which means that God looked into what he wanted, brought it into reality. And when we look into his Torah, as we're here to reveal the deeper depths, we also bring things into reality, which is why it happened to be that why the Zohar says that in the 6th century of the 6th millennium, the chambers of heavenly wisdom will open up, flooding the world with divine wisdom. And similarly, like in the times of Noah, the well springs of earthly wisdom will also open up, and the earthly wisdom, technology, information, communication, etc., acts as a carrier way for the divine wisdom, allowing it to be brought down and revealed in many languages, which it never was before, and transmitted to many people, ultimately all people all over the world, like we're doing now. Obviously, we're not reaching all people yet, but through our collective, we can. And that can be very accelerated. And so we have to understand that we're here, every soul here, and this is where it comes to purpose and destiny, every soul here is connected to the central soul, whether you know it or not. Some people don't know they have a soul. Some people don't believe in God. I used to be one of those. And are here to play a central role in this ultimate revelation of the depths of the Torah that are here for our generation to reveal, so that we can complete this process of awakening and go into the next stage. What's the next stage? It's not disembodied souls. The next stage is heaven on earth. And then we take it from there. There are many, many levels of that we have no ability to imagine, but they're wonderful. So we're in this transition point, literally like a transition and birth. And it depends upon a lot of the power that we have. Our own power will be amplified and accelerated in our connection to that central soul. Okay, that said, I want to tell you, I want to keep this as tight as I can, but my own personal story. So I started out right after I graduated from college, and my parents got divorced. I grew up, I grew up in a non-religious family, but my grandparents, my mother's parents, were very religious, and we had moved away from where they were in Chicago and moved to Minnesota, where my father became a professor at the University of Minnesota. So we weren't religious. I knew we weren't religious, but I loved my grandfather, and he used to tell me stories, and my grandmother, but my grandfather, used to tell me stories about all through my growing up, about when he was 6 years old, and his parents. He lived in a little town, a shtetl, Jewish town in Lithuania, known as Esheshak, and his parents didn't have any money. Everything, I'll say this in a moment, but his parents had no money and they moved to America. And most of their kids were older. My sorry. My grandfather was, Debbie, can you bring my water? I'll take a drink of this. Sorry about that. So sorry. My grandfather was left in Asia shock with his younger brother, who was 5. Oh, this is awkward. Because why did their parents leave them? In days before faxes and cell phones and airplanes and everything else that we have right now, much less Zoom, why did their parents leave them? Because at the time, there were no Torah learning institutions in America. And that's how important it was to my great-grandparents that their children learn Torah. Imagine leaving a 5 and 6-year-old. Yes, they had an older sister who was married, who lived 20, 30 miles away, but in the horse carts with no money, they would only go to see her a few times a year. So these children were left, and my grandfather used to tell me stories after he moved to America and had his own family. My mother was the youngest of 6, so he used to tell me stories when I sat on his lap as if they were fairy tales. There was no resonance of suffering or hardship. They were beautiful, these stories. He told me that how they used to learn in the yeshiva, in the Torah institution, that lest they fall asleep, they would learn standing up. How they were by themselves, their family wasn't there, so they would go to different houses, one every day. In Yiddish, it's called Essentag. And they would be fed by that family, but the families were very poor. So he told me with a laugh, we'd go to a house and they would think these boys are eating all right. And, other families have more, so we'll just feed them some cucumbers. And then they go the next day and they get cucumbers. And that's what they had to eat, except on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, where they would receive a big piece of challah bread. And I think he said 3/4 of a kopeck. And with the 3/4 of a kopeck, they would buy herring in brine, and they would eat Friday night the challah with the herring, and on the day of Shabbat they would dip the challah in the brine, and that was their meal. But he told it to me with this wonderment and love, and about the brilliant people that could stick a pin in a Gemara, in a Talmud, a book like this thick, and tell you every letter it was going through. My grandfather said, I'm not like that, but there are people who are. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know what day of the week Shabbat was. I knew that there was one time, sometimes I'd get to my grandfather's house and I would know that I wasn't supposed to turn on the lights, but I didn't know when. And so that was the state of my being. And as I got older, because I was the only Jewish kid in my high school of 2,500, and because my parents were not interested, after a while, so I just grew up secular. I was very attracted to Eastern religions. And I thought that Judaism was beautiful, but for older people, for grandparents, I didn't know that there was such a thing as young people or regular people, as I thought about it, in our times, that were keeping the Torah. It seemed foreign to me. And eventually, it came to the point one day where my family was so disconnected in Minnesota that I knew that Passover was coming, Pesach, but I didn't know when it was. And I thought, who would know? Who could I even ask? My grandfathers had passed away by that time. And at that point, my inner self said to me, you have gone too far. You're too far away. And I went to a Hillel rabbi, and he told me to say a prayer. And I told him, what if I'm mad at God? If there is a God, how could he make a world like this? And he said, talk to him about it. It was the best advice possible. So anyway, long story, not so short, but shorter. There came a time when I ended up, my youngest brother had become observant. I thought he was crazy, not because it was bad, but because we don't do that. Our grandparents did that. What do you mean you're observant? You mean you're observant? We're not observant. That I didn't understand the concept. So he sort of tricked me into going to a women's learning institution, a young women's learning institution that happened to be close to our neighborhood. We rode our bikes there, and he made himself disappear. And there were several young women there, and they came and talked to me. And I had recognized one of them from a camp that we went to for many years before. Anyway, I just graduated college. My parents had just gotten divorced. I was kind of at a loss. And when they invited me to stay there and to study for a few days and just hang out with them, and I decided, okay, what have I got to lose? And then I started to learn the things that I teach, the kind of things that I teach. I started to learn this mystical wisdom called Hasidus or Hasidut. It's authentic Kabbalah and all of the Torah brought down in the language of man and in analogies that will take you layer by layer into divine consciousness and divine presence that will literally change your brain and change your life. And I started to hear answers to questions that I thought had no answers. And those answers not only made sense, they resonated as true. So anyway, so back to the story about the story about my grandfather. This is the history that I had with my grandfather, and then this is me. So I ended up in this place, and every day I was going to leave, and every day there's like, no, just stay for the next class, or we're going to have a get together, we're going to sing, oh, there's a special time. I ended up staying for the whole summer. At the end of this, toward the end of the summer, the wife of one of the Rebbe's secretaries, administrators, came to this school and said that we would have the opportunity to write to the Rebbe. We could write a letter. That's how people communicated with the Rebbe. You couldn't actually, except in very special times. If you had that, if you caught that special time, and you could actually sometimes have a momentary audience with the Rebbe. It used to be that it was before my time, it was more, but in my time, that wasn't even possible, except for a few, maybe you would have a moment with the Rebbe in a group, going by and asking for a bracha, a blessing. So she said that we could write to the Rebbe and we could ask for what we wanted. We could ask for a blessing, and that there were miracles. Incredible miracles. The Rebbe is the central soul, don't forget. Like Moses. Moses is called in the Torah, in the Bible, every version of it. Moses is called Isha Elohim, which means a man of God, but literally it's explained to mean that he was a man in a body, but his connection to God was so intense that the Shekhinah, the immanent divine presence, spoke through his mouth. In other words, the man part was out of the way when it came to downloading and communicating. That's why he was the receiver of the entire Torah with all the codes. And then the central soul, that soul, it's called Pashtusta de Moshe B'chol Dara B'dara. There's a manifestation of a reincarnation of the soul of Moses in every generation in this central soul. It's one central soul. Anyway, so she said we could write, and we might get an answer and we might get a blessing, but before we write, we have to commit ourselves that we will do what the Rebbe tells us to do. So I had a strong desire. I really felt, something in me felt that the Rebbe was true, even though I didn't know if God was real. And that made me sad, because over time I started to feel that, it would be so amazing if there was someone in charge, that, some theme, some purpose, some point, some destiny, some guiding hand, but it seemed too good to be true. And then my second thought was that if there is such a creative force, that it wouldn't care about me. Like, who am I in the matter in this picture? So, but the Rebbe somehow felt holy, the idea of the Rebbe. And I didn't know why till after I learned what I'm going to tell you very soon. But one of the ways that I related to it was I was taking karate in college, and some of the karate masters, I've mentioned this many times, but some of the karate masters, the highest level in Japan Karate Association, the president of the Japan Karate Association, the vice president, 10th degree black belts, 9th degree black, as high as it goes, would come to our dojo now and then because of their relationship with my teacher. And I would see things, they would tell us things, and I would see things that seemed not possible. So I understood the concept of a master, but for some reason, I felt intuitively like the Rebbe was the master of masters. I just felt it. I felt it. So I was afraid to write. I was afraid of what the Rebbe would tell me to do. But then I said, okay, what's he going to tell me to do? He's going to tell me to put up a mezuzah, the parchment scroll that goes on the door, that represents the blood on the doorpost that protected the firstborn of the Jewish people when the firstborn of the Egyptians were being killed in the exodus from Egypt? Or is he going to tell me to, I don't know, give charity every day? It's another mitzvah. And I figured that even if he would tell me to do one of those things, even if I wasn't sure I believed, I'm willing to do it. So I wrote, and basically I told the Rebbe that I don't really believe in God. I feel like it's too good to be true, but I wish that there would be a God. And if there was a God, I don't think he cares about me in any way. I don't know what my, next steps are. And I just wrote to him from my heart. And I also wrote about a problem that I'll keep personal here, but that I wish that it would be resolved. And I got a long, 2 days later, I got a long, long answer. And basically the Rebbe said that if I will keep the Torah, that I didn't even believe in, if I will keep the Torah, just as is the true nature of every Jew, he underlined, it's the true nature of every Jew to keep the Torah, because the Torah is bound to the souls. It says that the two things the first word of the Torah is Bereshis. It means in the beginning, Bereshis, and it can be read that there are two beginnings, because the first letter is base, which means two. So there are two beginnings, and the commentaries explain that there are two things that precede creation. One is the Torah, and one is the souls of Israel, and that the souls of Israel come even before. The souls of Israel are like the core souls that will be receiving the Torah. Ultimately, it's at the core, I think, of every human who will, make it through this process, who's gotten this, that there are many opinions that say that everybody ultimately will reveal that core, but that's right now, we're not in that place that everybody is, but we're in a place where people who are not Jewish, who don't have any background, are actually starting to yearn for Torah. And this is a rising movement. And many of them are in my circles and, my students and in the influencers program and so forth. And it's a very, very powerful thing. It's profound, prophetic. Anyway, so when I will keep the Torah as is the true nature of every Jew, then automatically this problem will be, my peace of mind will increase. The problem will resolve in a natural way. And it depends. I'm skipping a few pieces just to make it quick, but it depends. He wrote, it's simple. It's obvious, underlined twice, that it depends only on your will, underlined twice. And what is the Torah? He said to keep the Torah as is explained in the Code of Jewish Law. Anyway, I was not ready for that, but I had committed myself. Years later, I wondered why I felt that was an unbreakable commitment. Why did I believe that if the Rebbe said that I have to keep the Torah that I wasn't sure I believed in, I had to do it? It's all intricate. It's like, is the Rebbe our super conscious mind? I do believe so. He's the central soul of this generation. Is it that core? There are times when for every human being, there's a core of the soul that will start to shine, that's hidden. Like I call it the superconscious, that's hidden from us so deeply that we can't operate from it. Our logic doesn't agree with it. Our worldview doesn't agree with it, but it will come out and push and blast forth our soul and our connection in a way that will override everything. That's basically what happened to me. And I wasn't so happy about it. I was overjoyed to get an answer, very scared, terrified to take on a new life that I wasn't at all aligned with. None of my friends were Jewish. I didn't have access to kosher food. I didn't want to have access to kosher food. For sure, I didn't want to keep the, Shabbos, the Shabbat, the Sabbath, none of that. But so it was a process, but I did it. And eventually I had to move to New York in order to keep it up, to a Jewish neighborhood, to a religious neighborhood. That was the Chabad, the neighborhood of the Rebbe. But anyway, I got that answer. I tried hard. The summer program ended. I went back to college, and I didn't have a car. In a Minnesota winter, if you know what that's like, or if you don't, you can get, the snow keeps coming and it doesn't melt. It just gets packed down, and more snow comes on top of it, and more ice comes on top of it. And at the end of the winter, you might have multiple feet of snow that got packed down. Anyway, it was really, really cold. And I wasn't in any kind of Torah community. And so I started to feel like I can't do this. I'm choking. At the last minute, I decided that I had an invitation to go to a retreat on a Friday night, and I was still keeping the Sabbath. But I was ready to give it up because I couldn't. And anyway, at the last minute, I decided that I wouldn't go to the retreat on Friday night, that I would go to a family who was, a Sabbath observing family that I really enjoyed. And I would go to the retreat on Sunday. And it was my last chance. It was, I was giving the Torah and the Shabbos, the Shabbat, a final chance. So I went to the family's house. I had a really good time. Toward the end of the day, they told me, don't leave. Don't go home now. We have a very special guest coming. It's a very special day. What was the day? It was, so after the Shabbat, it was the 7th of Shvat, like I told you. many years later, I looked at the calendar and I realized that the day that I had chosen to get married and the day that God chose to give me my firstborn, to, make my firstborn child be born, was the very day that this had happened. So they said a speaker is coming. He's going to talk about the previous Rebbe. So the 10th of Shvat is the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the previous Rebbe, and obviously that means that it was the shift, the change of guard of the central soul. So as the Rebbe took the leadership of our generation, and the previous Rebbe was in my grandfather's generation, although he was not at all connected to this movement, he was in opposition to it. It's interesting. Anyway, so I thought to myself, okay, I'll stay another night. I didn't have that much going on in my cold Minnesota apartment, and so after the Shabbos, after the Shabbat, I went with them to the Chabad headquarters, to Lubavitch House, as it was called, and there were about 100 people in the room, and the speaker came in who was coming to talk about the previous Rebbe on the occasion of his yahrzeit. So he was walking like a bent over, he had a long beard. I was sitting in the front next to a friend. He was walking in very gingerly. He obviously, was not in great shape. He looked about 75. Apparently he was in his 50s, and his name was Shlomo Zalman Hecht. He was literally the first follower of the Rebbe that went out as an emissary to set up a Chabad house, if you've heard of that, to bring people back, to bring Jews back to the Torah. I didn't know any of that then. So he walked up to the dais and he spoke in a strong, young voice, and he said, "I'm so happy to see all these young faces here. This is amazing." Remember, he was the first person that was sent out in a world that didn't learn Torah. Remember, my grandfather and his baby brother of 5, he is age 6, were left in Europe in the early 1900s by their parents who needed to come to America to make a better life, because they needed to be there to learn Torah. So this rabbi is looking around and seeing that there's been a rebirth of people keeping the Torah, people that had no connection, people like myself, no overt connection, maybe people like yourselves. And he said, I'm looking at these faces of these young people, and I'm so happy, so excited, so gratified. And he said also, Rabbi Feller, the rabbi who ran that particular Lubavitch house, Chabad house, said he's been asking me to come for 10 years, and I haven't been able to. And finally, I'm here. I'm so happy. And I thought, finally, and I'm here. Wow, what a coincidence. I didn't go to the retreat either. Wow, and if I hadn't come for this last Shabbat, I wouldn't have even been here. So I'm thinking that. And then he says, the previous Rebbe whose yahrzeit we're celebrating right now, used to always tell us, he was very, very interested in what's called hashgacha pratis, divine providence. And he told us, he would always repeat a story about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, that the Baal Shem Tov used to, this holy sage, I was going to say previously, when talking about looking into the Torah, learning the Torah and revealing something, the Baal Shem Tov revealed this final level of Torah known as Hasidus in the mid-1700s. Well, he was born in the mid-1700s. He revealed that to his disciples, and it took off and now is spread around the world in so many ways and in so many languages over so many generations of the central souls teaching it and so forth, and people learning it. Anyway, at that time, that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, because when there's a new opening, like I quoted the Zohar, when there's something new revealed from above or from within, in terms of the Torah, that divine transmission, something new opens up as a possibility in the world. Now look what we have going on in the world, in technology and information and connectivity and communication, and just think about the level of divine consciousness that's ready to be absorbed. In any case, he said the Baal Shem Tov always used to ask people when he would meet them in Yiddish, "Was gedenkst du?" What do you remember? Like, what, tell me something about yourself, like that. And the person would tell him something that happened in their life that made a huge impression on them. And he would tell them, because he saw souls, why that happened, what it was, what was the significance of that thing that happened to them in their life. What did it mean for them? What was the lesson? So the speaker, Rebbe Hecht, is telling this, and he said the previous Rebbe would always quote this story of the Baal Shem Tov. So I'm asking myself, wow, I'm saying this is divine providence for me, and what does this mean? And then he went on and told some stories of people that he never mentioned anyone's names. He told a story about 5 stories of people, different. The one I remember, there's only one I remember, where he said there was a man that used to come once a year from Europe to the Rebbe's office to see the Rebbe, and he would get special permission, the previous Rebbe. And the secretary, he didn't want to go in and bother the Rebbe, but he would want to look at the Rebbe's face. No Zoom, no TV. And the secretary would open the door for a moment, and he would glance at the Rebbe's holy face, and he said, that's enough for me for the year. He'd take that back with him, and with that energy and that connection, he would live his new potential in the year. So anyway, he told that story, and then he, his other 5 or 6 stories, no names mentioned. Then he said, and this is the part that, this is where destiny, purpose, and souls will come together. So he said, during the war years, we had a fund, meaning the Holocaust. And in that fund, by the way, he was from Chicago, this rabbi. He had made his home in Chicago, and that's where he was operating from as an emissary of the previous Rebbe, spreading Torah. He said there was a group of us there who collected money for the refugees of the Holocaust and brought it to Europe and to Israel. Israel, he said, was closed at the time. So this, I figured out later, was 1947. Israel became, officially open to immigration, Jewish immigration, in 1948. And he said among those who was there at the time was a man by the name of Reb Shmuel Breda. He said he was the president of this fund, this Keren Hatzalah, and he was also the president of the best kosher sausage company. He said he was the president of the best kosher sausage company. So I started to cry. Maybe you already heard this story, because people tell it around the world and it's in books. I'm telling you, this is the horse's mouth. Anyway, he said, the best kosher sausage company was my grandfather's company. My parents used to bring home pastrami and salami and hot dogs that were kosher. I didn't know about kosher. I didn't care about kosher, but the food was good. And I knew that we got it for free. Anyway, nobody could have known that. Like, how specific do you get? You don't mention anyone's name, and all of a sudden you're saying the name, and you're saying the company, and you're saying the president of this. So, and I'm thinking divine providence. In 10 years, he wasn't here, and they tried to get him, and I was almost not here. And I didn't think God cared about me, but now he's telling me about my grandfather. That's the story he's telling everybody. What's going on here? And it started to put me in a state of extreme emotion and wonderment, and not knowing and not understanding. Like, the brain goes there when life is not what I thought. The world's not what I thought it was. Wait, what's happening here? So he continued, and he said that Reb Breda, who was not a chassid, I found out that he was very anti the Hasidic movement, which was kind of a new trend starting from the Baal Shem Tov in the Jewish mainstream. Now it's totally mainstream, but it was not then. So anyway, he said he was the one who was delegated to take the money. He was the president, and he took the money that we raised. He said we raised $180,000, which was a tremendous amount of money in 1947, and took it to a certain town in France, which I believe was Brunois. He said the suburbs of Paris. And he took it to Israel, which was closed. So when he came back from this trip, Rabbi Hecht says, he told us something had happened to him, something unbelievable that he would never forget. So he said, we pricked up our ears and we asked him, what happened that you'd never forget? You flew with the Sputnik? So he said, I went to this town near Paris to give these people money. Sorry, didn't put my phone on silence, to give people money that had nothing. These were refugees from the Holocaust. He didn't say, but probably their families, many wiped out, had nothing. They had escaped to the suburbs of Paris. And he said that I wanted to understand how these people had lived through the incredibly difficult years of the war. So I walked around, he said, my grandfather said to Rabbi Hecht, and nobody knew it was my grandfather, only me. But one of the rabbis, Rabbi Feller, one of the rabbis saw me crying, and we had had a conversation about my grandfather a couple of weeks before, and he told me, Shifra Hana, I'm telling you, your grandfather has something to do with why you came back. It's always something, that some merit, something happens that brings people to Torah. So that's for everybody. Anyway, so he goes on and he says that that Rabbi Breda told us that he said, I wanted to find out how the people lived through difficult years of the war. So I went to the streets to meet the people. And I asked that I spoke to elders, and I spoke to middle-aged and to young couples. And then at random, he said, I picked a little boy of about 8 years old, just in the street. I said to him, little boy, I'm here from America to help. Is there anything that you would want very, very much that I could give to you? And then he said, do you know what this little boy answered me? Rebbe Hecht said, how could we know? So Reb Breda, I'll now say it in Rebbe Hecht's voice, Reb Breda said, I thought that he would ask me for shoes, for candy bars, for clothes, for a hat, for something. These people had nothing, but instead he said to me, I want to have the schus, the merit, to grow up and go to America someday to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So Rabbi Hecht said to my grandfather, what does this mean to you? So he said, I could understand if an older person had such a strong relationship with their Rebbe, with their spiritual leader, that it overrode everything, that they didn't care about anything else. And that was the only thing that they wanted in their universe. It's pretty high level, I'm saying. But he said, I could understand that. But this child of 8, not only he never saw the Rebbe, his parents never saw the Rebbe. Because the previous Rebbe had moved 30 years before from Lubavitch, the town of Lubavitch, which is where this stream of the Hasidic movement comes from, to the town of Utbask in Poland. So, and these people were, refugees. So he said, a little boy of 8, he said, if a Rebbe, the central soul, I'm saying, can leave such an impression that even a child of 8, even the little children, want more than they want food, candy, clothes, toys, anything. They want to see the Rebbe. He said, this level of connection is something that the world has not yet seen. And then Rebbe Hecht added, and Reb Breda was not a chassid. He was an Eisheshaker. Remember, I told you at the beginning of this story that Eisheshak was the name of the town that my grandfather used to tell me stories about. And that was, by the way, destroyed completely in the war, in the Holocaust. Nobody survived. Even my grandfather's sister, who lived nearby, was murdered. And Eisheshak happens to be the archetypal shtetl town that is represented in the Holocaust Museum, I think in Washington, in the tower where all the Eisheshak descendants were asked to send pictures. My family was asked to send pictures because it's all gone. It's a world. There was a book written about it, A World That Was, but nobody knew that then. The only person in the room who knew the word Eisheshak or what an Eisheshaker was me. So you name no names, but you mention my grandfather's name 7 times. You name no details, but you say he was a president of Best Kosher. He was not a chassid, as is also known by who? He was an Eisheshaker, and Eisheshak is not chassid. So these were, and here I'm just going to remind you that I was sitting from a place where I did not believe in God, and I wanted to. And I was just by divine providence put in this situation because my life was kind of broken, and I had an opportunity by divine providence to get someone to take care of me for a few weeks, give me food, give me a place to stay, give me some cool learning once I started learning it, to feel cozy and safe in a crazy world. And then I had to decide, am I going to take this on in my life? And I wasn't up to it, even though I responded to an answer from the Rebbe that I never expected, but it got to the point where I couldn't. And I felt alone. And I felt like I was drifting off in a little rowboat into the ocean, farther and farther from anything I knew or anything where anyone was, all by myself. And it was so sad because my mother even told me, Grandpa wasn't a chassid. We didn't have anything to do with this. So here I am by divine providence in this gathering with so many steps that could have so easily never happened, including that it was the rabbi was there for the first time after being asked for 10 years, that moment in time. And then the story that this rabbi chose to tell, not because he knew I was there, could have told thousands of stories. He chose a few, never said anyone's name, and then told this utterly detailed, random, irrelevant detail level story without knowing why. So why did that happen? How did that happen? And this is where it comes to purpose, destiny, and souls. He had a purpose. This wasn't his only purpose, but this was one of the final things that he ever did, because 3 months later, he passed away in his 50s. And if I hadn't been there at that moment, nobody would have ever heard the story, ever. And it wouldn't have done what it did, which was to totally flip my paradigm up on its head. Because, and I thought about it in a kind of a childish way, but if all these people that God loves, the people that were already religious and had family and whatever, if the person that God sent him to tell a story about my family that I thought was totally disconnected, the God I thought probably didn't exist, and if he didn't care about me, then what is that telling me? What is that telling me? What is that telling me? And the what? Not everybody has a story like this. It's a great merit for me because there's no way that I would have become observant without it. There's no way that I would have walked this path without it. I needed to be hit on the head by a mystical experience. Those have many different, there's the versions, there's a variety of those. But what does it mean for you? Because I didn't see that the other side of the tapestry, that God was directing every footstep of every person from 1947. That's when I heard the story start, but that's when my parents got married. But even from way before, from the beginning of time, this tapestry is woven with everyone's timeline and the meeting places and the reasons and the lessons and the connections and the going forth in ways that we could not possibly imagine beyond time and beyond space. That's the first level. The second lesson that I learned is about the central soul. So how could it be that a central soul is so connected that central soul implanted this? Oh, I'm not finished. I left out the best part. I told you I was frazzled at the beginning of this call. I've been on nonstop for a week and a half and it's taking its toll. So after this, I'm going to rest. So after this story happened, so we have the divine providence part, souls, purpose, and destiny. After this story happened, I went up to the dais and I was like, I could barely talk. And I wanted to know what he could tell me about my grandfather who had passed away many years before. So he said, your grandfather and I weren't good friends. He didn't say he tried to shut down my my synagogue but he said he's much old. He said he was much older than me, but we worked together for a period of time around this enterprise. And I can tell you some things that when he came back, when he told us his story, he was so moved by what he had seen that he asked me if he could have a personal audience with the Rebbe. Remember, I said, if you were here from the beginning, that it's not easy to get an audience. It was not easy to get an audience even with the current Rebbe, but the previous Rebbe was tortured by the Stalinist regime, and he could not speak even clearly. And he was fragile physically, and so it was very hard. And it was a couple of years before his passing, so it was very hard to get an audience. Rabbi Hecht basically said. But then he said I was able to get an appointment for him, and when he went in, he came out and he said it was the most incredible experience that he had ever had. But then he said, and this is the thing you have to understand, he said, the Rebbe called me, Rabbi Hecht, into his office. And he told me Rabbi Broida was by me today. And before I tell you what was said, you have to think that if a spiritual advisor takes things in confidence, holds things in confidence, if a lawyer holds things in confidence, if a doctor holds things in confidence, how much more so a Rebbe? So this is extremely unusual. He said, the Rebbe called me into his office and he told me Shmuel Broida was by me today, and he told me what happened. He said that he had asked your grandfather about his business, about his life, about his spiritual work, and he answered. And then he said to him in Yiddish, excuse my accent, "Was tun eure Kinder? What are your children doing?" And he said, your grandfather he said, the Rebbe told me he burst into tears. And he burst into tears. I know why he burst into tears, because my mother was the youngest of 6, and every one of my grandfather's parents did an inhuman, superhuman act to leave their babies in Europe while they made money in America, and they weren't able to bring him till he was 17 years old just to learn Torah. And that was my grandfather's essence. And then he brought up his children in America, and this is not an uncommon story, not taking into account the environment. And like many, many, many Jews, his children decided, religion's not for me. I don't really believe this stuff. Can you imagine what that would be like for a person with that life? So he burst into tears. And the Rebbe's telling Rabbi Hecht, and Rabbi Hecht is telling me. And he said, it was the Rebbe's promise. It was the Rebbe's promise that brought you and your brother, my younger brother, back to the Torah, because the Rebbe then promised your grandfather, he told me he promised your grandfather that he would have nachas from his einaklach. Einaklach means grandchildren. He was crying about his children. But the Rebbe said, you will have spiritual gratification from your grandchildren. And here I was, former atheist / serious agnostic, feeling lost and alone and disconnected. And this whole thing was orchestrated from above. So here's the next thing. That promise, my grandfather never lived to see it fulfilled, but the promise was alive. The promise of the central soul never is finished until it's finished. It never dies. And the Rebbe promised us. That promise was waiting to be activated. Okay, that's the last piece, and then I will sum up here. This is unusually long. I thought it would be unusually short. Anyway, so the last piece is the central soul has the ability, because he's in the human world in a body, but he represents God. We don't understand what a Moses is. It's a person and not a person. It's not just a holy person. It's not like an ascended master or something like that, whatever. This is something different. This is something like a one in a generation. This is something like a one that passes down through each incarnation, from Moses to the final Redeemer that the Jews know as Mashiach, the Anointed One. And that is the central soul that has a connection not only to every soul of the Jewish people, which is the Jewish people were split off to be carriers of the Torah. Originally, there was only one person, right? So everybody's descended from Adam. Everybody's descended from Noah. But the Jewish people are souls with the souls of Israel in Jewish bodies with particular mission to incubate the Torah under every circumstance and every attempt to wipe it out and to wipe them out. That's not been an easy road. And to do that until the world was ready to receive that which was incubated. And that's where we're up to now, you guys. So the Rebbe has the power to see the future, to implant in a chassid, in a person, any person, a message for another person, completely without the conscious awareness of any of those, either of those people or any of those people. And when the time comes, so from 1947 till decades later, when the time comes, that message gets activated and it gets delivered. And what the heck is that? And is that something that anybody walking around in the world today really understands, knows exists? So there's a certain privilege, incredible privilege, that some of us have had to see that in life, just to gaze upon the face of the central soul in life, to hear that voice, and even to ask a question and get an answer. But that can still happen in dreams, and it does. When you see the clear face of a tzaddik, a holy, righteous central soul, and the tzaddikim beyond the central soul, but when you see the face of a tzaddik, the Torah says it has to be the tzaddik coming to you, because dreams are driven by the subconscious, or even other, sometimes, mischievous, whatever. I don't want to go into it, but they don't have control of the face of a tzaddik. He's beyond the world and in the world. Now we all have this in our core. This is the time for the awakening of the destiny. My destiny was planned for me, and it became obvious for me. And I can only guess that was because I have a role to play that I would be willing to see, that my divine providence in every aspect of my life would ultimately drive me to where I want to share these things in bigger and bigger ways. As the timeline moves forward and we're moving through the Messianic era, that's where we are and have been since really 1991, 1992, even more so. We're in the Messianic era. This has been told to us. The Rebbe said this, literally in the Messianic era. But the Messianic era is like a birth process. The coming of the redemption, the final redemption, called the Geula HaMitis Vashlema, the true and complete redemption. That is when it's all complete, and the central soul will or however that's going to work, there will be the resurrection of all the souls back into their bodies, because death was never meant to be permanent. It's just a temporary state designed to facilitate the plan. How are your footsteps being directed? What happened to you in your life that you're listening to this now, or whatever else is bringing you closer to your essence, your mission, your God, your role in these times? You have one without any doubt. There is no soul in a body here today that doesn't have a unique piece of the puzzle that no one else in the universe can do. I'm talking to you. So I'll leave it at that because we're way over time. Try to keep these under 30 minutes. I want to get them shorter, but it's a special time. So tonight is Yud Shvat, and it is the anniversary. It is the yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe who passed away in 1950. So his soul on the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of any soul, the soul gets elevated. And when it's elevated on the principle of whatever's highest goes the lowest, the deeper you can get, the farther you can spread. Like when the source of a river is very strong, the water will go very far and very fast and very wide. So every time there's an elevation of any soul, that soul's purpose is more elevated, and the power, the impact of whatever they achieved in their life or whatever people do who they impacted, their children or anyone, on the behalf of that soul elevates the soul. And that means that the soul's purpose and destiny continues to flow more strongly into the world even after they pass, and they are coming back, but how much more so the central soul. So tonight is the yahrzeit of the passing of the yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe, and his mission is elevated and will come down with far more force. And even though the Rebbe officially accepted, not the previous Rebbe, but his son-in-law, the Rebbe, the final Rebbe, officially accepted the leadership of this movement, stepping into that role of disseminating the final, in this phase, till the birth occurs, dissemination of that Torah, revelation of that Torah, which is the Torah that we learn and teach in the school and in the influencer program, and is learned and taught and now translated around the world in every language. When I first had this encounter, there was one book of the 5 books of Tanya translated into English, and nothing else. Look how fast it's accelerating. You want to know how long it's going to take? It's been so long. It's going to be so long. No, it's been so long to get us to this phase. And now we're in this phase, and it's getting faster and faster. And at the end of this phase, it's one moment. So why are you here? What is your role? Did I finish what I was saying? The Rebbe became Rebbe a year. He accepted the leadership a year and a day on the 11th of Shvat. So the 10th and the 11th are very holy days. You want to connect. If you're already in Israel, it's nighttime. Connect. That energy is alive and present on the anniversary of the date in magnificent and miraculous ways. So connect in some way. Look at a picture of the Rebbe. Think about and the previous Rebbe. Think you can look it up on Google. Rebbe. You'll see it come up. Lubavitcher Rebbe, or even just Rebbe, previous Rebbe. And start a conversation if you want to, because this is above time and space. A tzaddik is more present in the world, this says in Hasidus, after his passing than he was before. Why? Because his body and his words, what we could relate to, was the outside. It was covered up by the body and limited our ability to connect and to receive the transmission. After the tzaddik passes, the Tanya says, his soul, his body is under the earth, and his soul, his life force level of soul, is no longer covering his deeper levels of soul, which are his ruach, the emotions of the connection, the ability to open, to feel those, experience those heart-centered, soul-centered emotions, and his neshama, his divine consciousness, are now available outside of the body on the deeper level. To who and how? To his followers who connect to him with passionate love, to learn his teachings and to strive to follow his ways with a tremendous toil and effort. Though that the Tanya says is where the Rebbe's ruach and neshama, these deeper levels of soul, are revealed through the followers, and you certainly can be one of them. If you're a human being on the planet today, you are connected to this central soul, who strive to learn his Torah and to be like him. That's where it happens. That's where he's present. And when you have a relationship, you do get special privileges. There's no question about it. And that's a choice. How do you become related again to learn the Rebbe's Torah and teachings, and which is his level, his manifestation, revelation of the Torah, which is all about these times. This is the light and transmission and instructions and empowerment in supernatural as well as natural ways of the times of redemption to get us to the finishing line, cross the finish line. And if your role is necessary and you're not fulfilling it, who's fulfilling it? Hey? Okay. So respond to the call. If you feel the call, respond to it in ways that make sense to you. I am here to help. Happy Yud Shvat. And may we see it really, really soon and really, really easily, miraculously, over and out. See you next time.